But then, you see, you do the flip. But then, you see, you do the flip. In giving away the control, you got it. In giving away, you got the kind of control you wanted. That's to say, where you had a loving relationship to the world, but you didn't have to make up your mind what it should do. You let it decide. Now, do you see that's how your bodies work? You don't have to make up your mind what your nerve cells are going to do. You've delegated all that authority. If the President of the United States has to lay awake at nights thinking what every official under his command is going to do, he can't be President. He's got to make an act of trust in all those subordinates to be responsible and carry on their things in just the same way as you make an act of trust to all your subordinate organs to carry on their functions without you having to tell them what to do. And this is the secret of what we will call organic power as distinct from political power. Lao Tzu puts it in this way: the great Tao flows everywhere, both to the left and to the right. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. And when merits are accomplished, it lays no claim to them. The more, therefore, you relinquish power, trust others, the more powerful you become. But in such a way that instead of having to lie awake nights controlling everything, you do it beautifully by trusting the job to everyone else. They carry it on for you. So you can go to sleep at night and trust your nervous system to wake you up in the morning. You can even tell it, I want to wake up at 6 o'clock, and it'll wake you up just like an alarm clock. This seems a sort of paradox to say this, but the principle of unity, of coming to a sense of oneness with the whole of the rest of the universe, is not to try to obtain power over the rest of the universe. That will only disturb it and antagonize it and make it seem less one with you than ever. The way to become one with the universe is to trust it as another, as you would another, and say, let's see what you're going to do. But in doing that, you see, in saying that to everything else that you have been taught to think is not you, you are also saying it to yourself. Because finally, as I pointed out, you do not know where your decisions come from. They pop up like hiccups. And when you make a decision, people have a great deal of anxiety about making decisions. There's this guy farmer, who ordered a help man to come in, and found he was an extraordinarily efficient worker. Because the first day he put him on sawing logs, and he sawed more logs than anybody had ever sawed. It was fantastic. But it was all done in one day. So the next day he put him on to mending fences. And there were all kinds of broken fences around the farm. In one day he had the whole thing done. So he thought, what am I going to do with this guy? So he took him down into a basement and said, look, here are all the potatoes that have come in from this harvest. And I want you to sort them into 3 groups. Those that we sell, those that we use for seeding, and those that we throw away. So he left him at that. At the end of the day, the laborer came back and said, well, that's enough, mister. I quit. Oh, he said, you can't quit. I've never had such an excellent worker. I'll raise your salary. I'll do anything to keep you around here. I said, no. It's all right mending fences and chopping wood, but this potato business is decision after decision after decision after decision. So when we decide, we're always worrying, did I think this over long enough? Did I take enough data into consideration? And if you think it through, you find you never could take enough data into consideration. The data for a decision in any given situation is infinite. So what you do is, you go through the motions of thinking out what you will do about this. And then when the time comes to act, you make a snap judgment. I'm speaking a little extremely, making some fun of it and so on, because after all, we do occasionally get the vague outlines of things and make a right decision on rational grounds. But we fortunately forget the variables that could have interfered with this coming out right. It's amazing how often it works. But warriors are people who think of all the variables beyond their control and what might happen. So then when you make a decision, and it works out all right, I think very little of it has much to do with your conscious intent and control. But somehow or other, you are able to decide and control things more harmoniously if you delegate authority. very great businessmen are those who can delegate authority, trust others to work for them. Because those are people developing businesses on the same basic structure that is fundamental to a living organism: delegation of authority. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. And you see, then, what is happening is this. The more you let go of it and trust it, as if it were quite other than you, the more you realize the inseparable identity of self and other. Go back. If you try to find the identity of self and other by subjecting other to self, no go. If on the other hand you find it through giving self, that is control, over to other and trusting that, you may make a mistake. You may make a bad gamble. But in the long run, you're acting on a principle which has the backing of evolution. This is the way biological evolution goes on. Constant delegation of authority. That's why, obviously, the democracy is superior to the monarchy. Mr. Tocqueville who said that democracy is always right, but for the wrong reasons. Because there is operating in a democracy the principle that Buckminster Fuller calls synergy. Synergy is the intelligence of a highly complex system, the nature of which is always unknown to the individual members. Because that goes back again to this point, that we're always entering a new environment. We don't ever know fully what the new environment is, because the only environments we know are the past ones. There is always then operating in the development of cellular life on any level a new way of organization, higher than any existing form, and we are not aware of it until after it's happened. If you ever saw, for example, the film Kon-Tiki, this man figured out a few things as to how to make a balsa wood raft to sail from South America to the Pacific Islands. But once he had set this in motion, he discovered that all sorts of unexpected factors cooperated with him. That when the wood got wet, it expanded so that the ties bit into it and held it completely secure. He had never expected that. And he found that as he sailed along, A flying fish would simply alight flat on the deck every morning for breakfast. That all kinds of natural factors, it was just, he'd touched a key where he was flowing with the course of nature, and everything cooperated with it. Because he had touched the key. He'd made the act of faith. And he was just picking up, in other words, a practice which had been hundreds and hundreds of years ago, had been followed by others who had worked it out by their great ecological awareness. So we do come out of this way of thinking to something which has, I would say, the most enormously creative and revolutionary social consequences. That it has become not virtuous, not self-sacrificing, not anything like that. It has become the hardest practical politics to let go control to others, to give up trying to dominate the sea. Also, in a parallel way, it has become at this time in our history very much hard practical politics. To learn how to enjoy ourselves. You can go to the Protestant people with their Protestant ethic who are against this kind of thing, and now say to them with great glee, it is your solemn duty to learn how to enjoy yourself. Why? Because in an age of leisure, people have really got to know how to enjoy themselves. Because if they don't, they'll smash the whole future of the human race. So a utopia has become not some sort of a dream, but an urgent necessity. We can't do without it. Because if we try to do without it, what's going to happen is that we are going to terminate our race in a mutual massacre of scapegoats. paranoia in the United States that is going on, where everybody is thinking up a new scapegoat, how great it will be to demolish them, or get them out of power. All this kind of bickering and right and left politics has become irrelevant, because we now have the opportunity of trusting our own intelligence, our own technology, to take the risk of doing what we want, which will work to the extent that we realize that what I want, basically, what I really want is what you want. And I don't know what you want. But that's the kinship between I and thou. So when I ask, I go right down to the question, should we start it with, what do I want? The answer is, I don't know. When Bodhidharma was asked, who are you? Which is another form of the same question. He said, I don't know. Planting flowers to which the butterflies come. Bodhidharma says, I know not. I don't know what I want. Well, when you don't know what you want, you've reached the state of desirelessness. When you really don't know. But you see, there's a beginning stage of not knowing, and there's an ending stage of not knowing. In the beginning stage, you don't know what you want because you haven't thought about it, or you've only thought superficially. Then when somebody forces you to think about it and go through and say, yeah, I think I'd like this, I think I'd like that, I think I'd like the other, there's the middle stage. Then you get beyond that. Say, is that what I really want? In the end you say, no, I don't think that's it. I might be satisfied with it for a while, and I wouldn't turn my nose up at it, but it's not really what I want. Why don't you really know what you want? Two reasons that you don't really know what you want. Number one, you have it. Number two, you don't know yourself, because you never can. The Godhead is never an object of its own knowledge. Just as a knife doesn't cut itself, fire doesn't burn itself, light doesn't illumine itself. It's always an endless mystery to itself. I don't know. And this I don't know, uttered in the infinite interior of the Spirit, this I don't know is the same thing as I love, I let go, I don't try to force or control. It's the same thing as humility. And so the Upanishads say, if you think that you understand Brahman, you do not understand, and you have yet to be instructed further. If you know that you do not understand, then you truly understand. For the Brahman is unknown to those who know it, and known to those who know it not. Because you see, the human awareness is a very odd mechanism. I don't think mechanism is quite the right word, but it'll do for the moment. That is to say, we have, as a species, specialized in a certain kind of awareness, which we call conscious attention. And by this we have the faculty of examining the details of life very closely. We can restrict our gaze, and it corresponds somewhat to the peripheral field, the central field of vision in the eyes. We have central vision, we have peripheral vision. Central vision is that which we use for reading, for all sorts of close work, and it's like using a spotlight, whereas peripheral vision is more like using a floodlight. Now, civilization and civilized human beings for maybe 5,000 years, maybe much longer, have learned to specialize in concentrated attention. Even if a person's attention span is short, he is, as it were, wavering his spotlight over many fields. The price which we pay for specialization in conscious attention is ignorance of everything outside its field. I would rather say ignorance than ignorance, because if you concentrate on a figure, you tend to ignore the background. You tend, therefore, to see the world in a disintegrated aspect. You take separate things and events seriously, imagining that these really do exist, when actually they have the same kind of existence as an individual's interpretation of a Rorschach plot. They're what you make out of it. In fact, our physical world is a system of inseparable differences. Everything exists with everything else. But we contrive not to notice that, because what we notice is what is noteworthy. And we notice it in terms of notations. Numbers, words, images. What is notable, noteworthy, notated, noticed, is what appears to us to be significant, and the rest is ignored as insignificant. And as a result of that, we select from the total input that goes to our senses only a very small fraction. And this causes us to believe that we are separate beings, isolated by the boundary of the epidermis from the rest of the world. And you see, this is also the mechanism involved in not noticing that black and white go together. Not noticing that every inside has an outside, and that the inside, what's inside, goes on inside your skin, is inseparable from what goes on outside your skin. If we say, you must survive, or I must survive, life is earnest, and I've got to go on, then your life is a drag and not a game. Now, it's my contention, my personal opinion, this is my basic metaphysical axiom, shall we put it that way, that existence, the physical universe, is basically playful. But that it is best understood by analogy with music. Because music, as an art form, is essentially playful. We say you play the piano. You don't work the piano. Why? Music differs from, say, travel. When you travel, you are trying to get somewhere. And of course, we, because being a very compulsive and purposive culture, are busy getting everywhere faster and faster and faster till we eliminate the distance between places. I mean, with the modern jet travel, you can arrive almost instantaneously. And what happens as a result of that is that the two ends of your journey become the same place. So you eliminate the distance, and you eliminate the journey. Because the fun of the journey is to travel, not to obliterate traveling. So then, in music, though, one doesn't make the end of a composition the point of the composition. If that were so, the best conductors would be those who played fastest. And there would be composers who wrote only finales. People go to a concert just to hear one crashing chord, because that's the end. Same way in dancing. You don't aim at a particular spot in the room. That's where you should arrive. The whole point of the dancing is the dance. Now, but we don't see that as something brought by our education into our everyday conduct. And so, in this way, the human being sometimes becomes an organism for self-frustration. Let's take Korzybski called man a time binder. That means that he's the animal peculiarly aware of the time sequence. And as a result of this, is able to do some very remarkable things. He can predict. He studies what's happened in the past, and he says the chances are so-and-so of that happening again. So he predicts. Well, this is very useful to be able to predict, because that has survival value. But at the same time, it creates anxiety. You pay for this increased survival ability involved in prediction by knowing that in the end you won't succeed. You're all going to fall apart by one way or another. It might happen tomorrow, it might happen 50 years from now. But it all comes apart in the end. And people get worried about that. They get anxious. So what they gained on the roundabout, they lost on the swings. So then, if you see, on the other hand, that existence, this is, as I said, my basic metaphysical assumption, which I won't conceal from you, that existence is musical in nature. That is to say that it is not serious. It is a play of all kinds of patterns. We can look upon different creatures as we look at different games, as we look at chess, checkers, backgammon, tennis. There's the tree game, the beetle game, the grass game. Or you can look at them as you look at different styles of music, mazurkas, waltzes, sonata, etc., etc., all down the line. There are all these different things doing their stuff. And they're going to do, hoo-ji-do-de-do, you know, in different rhythms. And we're doing that. And when people, when you think a bit what people really want to do with their time, what do they do when they're not being pushed around and somebody's telling them what to do? They like to go, they like to make rhythms. They listen to music, they dance, or they sing, or they do something of a rhythmic nature, playing cards, or bowling, or raising their elbows. Everybody wants to spend their time swinging. And that's the nature of this whole thing we're in, you see. It likes to swing. That's why it does it.
As you know, this is the great discussion going on in what we call today the new theology. The revolution within standard brand Christianity. Because you see, for years and years, the clergy, the ministry of the various churches, such as Episcopalian, Methodist, Baptist, Congregational, Unitarian, even in some cases disciples of Christ and Lutherans, their theological seminaries have been discussing religion in terms utterly different than you will normally hear from the pulpit. And every graduate of an intelligent theological school has a sense of intense frustration as he has to get out to work in a community or parish church, because he does not believe what he is supposed to preach. And this has in a way been true for a long, long time. Clergy, except in the Roman Catholic Church, where the situation is somewhat different, are very heavily controlled by the laity, because he who pays the piper calls the tune. And therefore they are in a state of constant frustration, because those who contribute most heavily and therefore are most interested in the church tend to be conservative-minded people, and they want that old-time religion. Although, as a matter of fact, what they call the old-time religion is really quite modern. But still, that's what they want. And they're people who, as I would say, would tend to be conservative in their whole attitude to life. Because you see, people of a more liberal disposition couldn't care less about going to church. In the British Army, they have a thing called church parade. And there's a famous story about a drill sergeant who got all the troops up for church parade on a Sunday morning, and he used to call out, "Catholics to the right, Protestants to the left, fancy religions in the middle." And to the degree you see that intelligent people in our culture have any religion at all, it tends to be a fancy religion. Something in the new kinds of things that may be unity, Christian Science, Theosophy, Buddhism, Vedanta, or some kind of special Protestant. Or the community church in New York and things of that kind. Very liberal, very left-wing theologically. So the new theology comes at this time to a very large extent because A, the clergy are fed up. B, Christianity has its back to the wall. And the Pope knows this better than anybody. And so, hand in hand with this ecumenical movement, there goes along a reconsideration of what on earth it's all about. Is there a God? Is there God? a lot of people are boldly saying that is to be abandoned. As an English priest, Father Maskell, put it, it is the basic assumption of the secularist movement in Christian theology that life is a journey between the maternity ward and the crematorium, and that is what there is. That's it. And that only is the life that the Christian religion has to do with and to encounter. And therefore, more than ever, being a Christian, if it is an abandonment of God, or of the idea that the universe is supernaturally controlled, the Christian religion fastens itself, therefore, with peculiar and increased fervor to the figure of Jesus of Nazareth. As one wit put it, there is no God and Jesus Christ is his only Son. Because you see, what otherwise makes you a Christian? There's something strange about Christianity, in that it shares with Islam and Judaism what we might call theological imperialism. Christians are of even the most liberal stripe, fervently believe that their religion is the best religion. And they will state it by saying, either Jesus Christ is the only Son of God. That's an orthodox way. As a matter of fact, it isn't really an orthodox way of saying it. That's the way orthodox people do say it. Or they will say, Jesus is the greatest man that ever lived. The point is that you make a commitment to the following of Jesus as an historical personage. For some reason or other, people who commit themselves to this exclusive kind of following of Jesus become exceedingly obstreperous, because they will either damn other religions outright, or far more insidiously damn them with faint praise. Old Buddha taught some very good things, you know, and we all are indebted to his great moral principles, but, and then this pitch, you see, for the soul following of Jesus as the Lord and Master, head and shoulders above all. Well, the trouble with that has always been that when you get into a theological argument with a person who is a Christian, you get into a situation where the advocate and the judge are the same person. That is to say, Jesus is judged the best man in the world by the standards of Christianity, because those are the standards with which this kind of person judges. And therefore, and you'll find that people who leap to these judgments usually don't know very much about any other kind of religion. The courses on comparative religion in theological schools are shockingly superficial and grossly inaccurate. And so this is coming to the front now, you see. In order to be to belong to the church, really, is to be saved. And to be saved is to belong to the innerst in-group. You have to have an in-group, you see. If you want to know who you are, you have to belong to something. Say, if you want to distinguish yourself, because you know who you are because of the people who aren't like you. There you get a contrast. Now this is the basic arrangement for a church. So you see, if you want to be in some kind of an in-group, you must put everybody else beyond the pale. St. Thomas Aquinas gave the show away, actually, because he said that the blessed in heaven will often walk to the battlements and look down and delight in the justice of God being properly carried out in hell. So, but you may not believe in hell. You may be very liberal, and after all, it's not nice or sophisticated nowadays to believe in everlasting damnation. But we have new words for it, such as failing to be a real person, sinking below the human level, or entering into final and irremediable psychosis. All these are new words, either for damnation or heresy. And so you join, and you know you're saved only if somebody else isn't, if somebody else is damned. It's very difficult to believe, or even to imagine a state of affairs where everyone and everything is saved. You have to be a mystic even to think about that. Because it requires having a state of consciousness which transcends oppositions. And you can't do that along the line of ordinary logic. You have to have a new kind of logic which takes over at a certain point. And this logic I'm using at the moment by pointing out that damned people and saved people need each other. They are in a symbiotic relationship with each other. Together in the same way as the back and the front of something. Because if something has a front, it has to have a back too. And so, the very fact that fronts and backs go together indicates that there is a unity between these two opposed sides. So also there is a unity between the damned and the saved. And it's only as you begin to realize that you need the damned people in order to be saved, and that the damned people need the saved people in order to be damned, that you start laughing about it. And that laughter is very subversive. And it's, you know how it is, you're not supposed to laugh in church, and not in courts of law either. There are places where laughter makes people nervous. Because it's supposed to be a sign of disrespect. Now, it may not be so at all. Dante says that the song of the angels in paradise sounded like the laughter of the universe. But in church, especially any rather more serious kinds of church, laughing is very bad form. Why? Because if you look at the design of a Catholic church, you will notice that it is based upon the design of the courtroom of a king. And if you look at a Protestant church, you will see that it is based upon the design of a law court. Indeed, the Protestant minister wears exactly the same robes as an American judge. And all those pews and box-like stalls are the same that you will find in the old-fashioned court, with a witness box, jury box, and all that kind of thing. But you see, the original idea of the Christian church, these ancient Roman churches, are called a basilica. That means the courtroom of a king, the throne room. The altar is the throne of God. Now, in a courtroom, the king is very nervous, because anybody who takes it upon himself to govern other people and rule them had better watch out. And therefore he always has his back to the wall. And he is flanked by attending guards and high ministers of state. And just so that nobody will get up and make trouble, he has them either on their knees or flat on their faces when they come into his presence. And of course, no one must laugh. They'll be laughing at Mr. Big. And so this was the pattern, this was the model upon which the Judeo-Christian idea of God was based. Model, and the title of God is taken from the supreme emperors of Persia, the Dayan Khan, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And so in the English church, at morning prayer, the clergyman gets up and says, Almighty and everlasting God, the only ruler of princes, King of kings, Lord of lords, who dost from thy throne behold all dwellers upon earth, most graciously deign to behold our gracious sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, and all the royal family. That's the picture. And the metaphor, you may not believe, literally, that God sits on a throne, or even has a body to put on one, or that he wears a crown, or that he has a beard. But the image colors your feeling about the character of God. And imagery is much more powerful than intellectual concepts. You may know, it says in the prayer book, that God is a spirit without body, parts, or passions, omnipresent to all places, eternal through all time. And therefore one thinks, as Haeckel does, of the gaseous vertebrate. Or else of an enormously diffused sea of luminous jello, filling all time and space. Everybody uses images. But behind those images are the old images that influenced us in childhood. And if you still attend a church and you use that imagery, you still think emotionally, you feel towards God as one would if you took it literally. So this political model of God has dominated the West. And the world is related to God as subjects to a king or as artifacts to a maker. We have, of course, a ceramic model of the universe, because it's said in the book of Genesis that God made Adam out of the dust of the ground. words, he made a clay figurine and then blew the breath of life into the nostrils of the figurine so that it came to life. Now, the Hindus don't have that model of the universe to cope with, because they don't look at the universe as God's creation in the sense of being an artifact. They look at it as God's drama, because they see the world as acted, not created. God is that which is pretending to be all this. And everybody is really God, is a mask of God, who is playing that he's you. But he's doing it so well that he's taken himself in, because he's the audience as well as the actor. It's a really successful play, because the good actor, although you know a play is just a play, a good actor is going to try and make you think it isn't. He wants to get you crying. He wants to get you sitting on the edge of your seat in anticipation. And God, as the best actor, has convinced himself completely that the act is real. The Chinese, again, have a different model. Their model of the universe is an organic one. It is a great organism. It is alive. Intelligent order. So those are the three great models of the world. When the West stopped believing seriously in God a long time ago, they, however, retained the idea of the world as an artifact. And so we graduated from the ceramic model of the universe to the fully automatic model, which is actual common sense for most people living today. I return to the point then that the clergy and the church people don't really believe in God in the old-fashioned sense of the word God at all. If they did believe the Christian religion in some of its orthodox forms seriously, they would be screaming in the streets. And even the most far-out lunatic fringe Jehovah's Witnesses are even more or less polite when they come and call at your house. Because if they really believed that you were going to hell, they would make more fuss about you than if you had the bubonic plague. But nobody really takes it that seriously. And that means they don't believe in it. They know they ought to believe in it. In fact, many sermons are exhortations to have more faith, which means that we all recognize that we don't really believe in this, and we ought to. We feel very guilty about it. We don't have the moral strength to believe in this. But it isn't only a matter of moral strength. It's a matter of being asked to believe what most people feel is nonsense. that the world is run on the lines of a state. How, for example, can you be a citizen of the United States, having taken an oath that a republican form of government is the best form of government, and believe that the universe is a monarchy? So what has happened is, intelligent people have always realized that this political model for the cosmos won't do. Now actually, no serious theologian ever did believe that God was an old gentleman with whiskers on a golden throne. Never. What the Bishop of Woolwich says in his book Honest to God, that there isn't some sort of a someone out there. He is very naive in a way, because he could have taken huge quotations out of St. Thomas Aquinas, out of the great fathers of the church, from Origen, from Clement of Alexandria, from St. Gregory Nazianzus, from St. John of Damascus, from St. Basil the Great, from St. Augustine, from St. Ambrose, from Bernard of Clairvaux, St. Albert the Great. He could have quoted all those perfectly orthodox, very correct theologians, and shown that they never believed in a God like that with whiskers. And he could have come forward and said, you see, this is a perfectly orthodox book, and I'm not a revolutionary, I'm just going back to the real old-time religion. He didn't do that. And you know why? He told me. He never read those writers in theological school. He was entirely confined to biblical studies. I never got as far as that, you see. So, but it's just the same with ever so many people. One of the reasons why so many people turned to an Oriental religion was that the intellectual level at which Oriental religions were first presented in the West was so much higher than the intellectual level at which Christianity was presented at the local church. If you lived in India or Ceylon, of course, there would be the local Buddhist monastery, and it would be just as junky as the stuff was around the local church. They don't tell people all about the great void and how to practice meditation and those things. That's for specialists, the minority. Why do you sing? Why do you like dancing? What's music for? That's what this hallelujah is. So when nothing is being clung to, when one gets to that point, everything blows up. This is what's meant by satori in Zen, sudden awakening. And you suddenly see, good heavens, what was I making all that fuss about? Because here we are. This is what we've been looking for all the time. That's it, right here. And that's the thing. And you realize that you basically, through and through, are all this. only you've got into a kind of a funny illusion. That what all this is a continuation of the 19th century philosophy, the fully automatic model, which is that this is an essentially stupid universe. It's a mechanism. It is a gyration of blind energy in which human intelligence and values happens to be a fluke, and a rather uncomfortable one, because nature doesn't give a damn about us. And so we have to fight it. And now all that is pure mythology. It is grossly unscientific. But most people believe it. It's common sense for today. But what an opportunity, though, there is in the new theology, and in this whole ferment going on, to get them to see this other point of view. And realize that when you get rid of God, all you are doing is you're destroying an idol. And all idols must be destroyed respectfully. Not like those wretched Puritans who went around destroying all the saints' figures and the stained glass in medieval churches. That was disrespectful iconoclasm. Respectful iconoclasm would be, for example, every Easter Sunday the Bible should be ceremoniously burned. Because if Jesus is truly risen from the dead, you don't need the Bible anymore. He's around. Available. You don't need the books. You burn it up ceremoniously with great respect. Because certainly God doesn't take himself seriously.
And I want to discuss with you a few ways which in Western history this obstacle has been thrown out, and how we today are bamboozled by these obstacles. In the history of Western civilization, there have really been, in the past 2,000 years, two dominant mythologies. One has had a long run and the other has had a fairly short run. But they are both ways of terrifying you so that you won't see the point. But at the same time, they are perhaps not merely negative things, but challenges, barriers of the same kind that a guru would offer. For example, in the study of Zen, each koan is referred to as a barrier. And if you can pass the barrier, you see, you get in. But the function of the teacher is to put the barriers up to see how you'll react to them. So, in a way, we could say that the two great mythologies which have dominated the Western world in the past 2,000 years are two barriers. The first, of course, is the Christian mythology. And in the Christian mythology, the individual is made to feel that he is strictly on probation, that he does not really belong, that if he is at all a son of God, he is so by adoption and grace. He isn't really one of the family. Let me explore the theology of that a moment. In Christian theology, God has only one Son. The monogenes, or the only begotten Son of God, who is the second person of the Trinity, the Logos, the divine idea of itself. The Trinity constitutes a family. Naturally, it's therefore threefold, because all, for the Greek mind, and it was the Greek mind that molded Christian theology, meaning entirely depends on the structure of the Greek language. And Greek, in common with all Western languages, and indeed also Sanskrit, from which it is derived, has a sentence structure in which there is the subject, the verb, and the predicate. And we can't make any sense without those three things. We have to have an I love you or an I know you sentence for there to be any love or for there to be any knowledge. There must be the lover. The lover can't love without having a beloved, and the lover doesn't relate to the beloved without the relationship of love between them. So there you have the subject, the predicate, and the verb. And so naturally, in Greek ideas, the very inner nature of reality of the Godhead itself must be threefold, following the structure of Greek thought and Greek grammar. So, in this way, the inner life of the Godhead is completely self-sufficient. There is the Son, the object of God's love, so that God doesn't need any created world of finite beings as the necessary object of his love, so that he can be love. You see? So then, the created world is something extraneous. It's something that the Lord threw off in a fit of exuberance. And although it is very much beloved by him, he doesn't in any way depend on it. He, in a sense, fathered it, but he fathered it out of nothing. It had no true mother. And so in a way it's an orphan. And the relationship between the Creator and the creature in popular Christianity has always been the relationship between the king and the subject. And the relationship between the king and the subject is very, very strange, estranged, because the king, in the archetypes of kingship which existed in the Near East in ancient times and upon which this theological imagery was originally modeled, the king was really afraid. He always appeared in the throne room with his back to the wall. He didn't stand in the middle of his people and say, you know, and look around at everybody like that. He stood with his back to the wall like this. It's funny how all altars and Buddhas and things have their backs to the wall, because there you can't be stabbed. And you have your guards and your henchmen on either side of you. And all the people prostrate themselves, because that way you can watch them all. They can't see you and you can see them. so you're safe. And that's the imagery, you see, which has given us our Western conception of God. Of the father whose children have become a little bit too much for him. He's had too many. And they have to be kept in their place. And so he's a little bit frightened. And so the rules are set up. You just do so and so and so and so. And you must feel grateful for having been fathered. You're a miserable worm. And therefore, inwardly, because without me you might not have been. You owe everything you have to my having produced you. And you are a debtor. And because you are a debtor, you have a duty. Duty is the same word as debt, debit. You owe life to me who produced you, although I won't admit I had a great deal of fun doing it. And so you must all crawl. Now, you see, that conception of our relationship to reality has been the popular idea for centuries in the Western world. So that you never really knew where you stood with the authority. Because the authority gives you the impression that you are so bad intrinsically that at any time you ought to be punished and eaten up. And it's only a matter of mercy that you're not being eaten up. So the prayers of the Christian church are full of the idea, O Lord, we are not worthy, and since it is only of thy great mercy that we continue to survive at all, we humbly beseech thee, etc., etc. Imagine going around with that feeling about the nature of reality, that it is watching you all the time, that you're always on probation, like a released prisoner. And therefore there is an all-seeing eye at every moment of the day and night surveilling you much more efficiently than any big brother could watch you through tiny TV cameras in your bedroom. I know a friend of mine who is a devout Catholic, and in her toilet, but she is different, she has a sense of humor. And in the toilet, you know, it's an old-fashioned one, there's a tank and a pipe coming down to the john, and there's a little placard on it with a big eye painted. And in Gothic letters underneath it, it says, "Thou, God, seest me." So always, everywhere, according to this mythology, there is the eye of the paternal judge watching you. Now, what can you do with a situation like that? If that's the way things really are, you don't know whether this Lord has a sense of humor, and whether you can say to him, "Hey, look, don't take such an advantage of me like that. Turn down that light a little. Close off your eyes sometimes. You don't need to be all that particular. You know I can't do anything to you. I can't knock you over. Why do you need to bug me all the time?" The sort of attitude is too much. And so people couldn't stand it. You know, 600 years of it was enough. And it became intolerable, really intolerable, because everybody knew they were sinners and that they were doing all the things against the rules in the book, and nobody could possibly put up with it. So the only thing they could do to relieve themselves of this horrible father figure was to make out that the universe didn't have a father at all. That it was really an orphan, not even virgin born. It didn't even have a mother. In other words, in order to escape from the mythology of a conception of ultimate reality, which was much too intelligent and much too nosy, people had to invent a conception of the ultimate reality that was completely banal and dead. So the second Western mythology is the mythology of the mechanical universe, which is a fluke emerging from a process of absolutely blind energy. And you must notice the language in which the great thinkers of the 19th century thought about the world. Freud, for the basic psychic energy, used the word libido, which in 19th century Vienna was exceedingly uncomplimentary. Libido, blind lust. And so in the same way, the science philosophers of the 19th century talked about the world as being based on brute force, unintelligent energy, and worked out a conception of man as a really rather unfortunate natural fluke. Consciousness, reason, and indeed also the passions and feelings and desires of the human heart were nothing but the end product of a roulette wheel of natural selection. It's a most curious paradox that those philosophers of the 19th century who denied the supernatural origin of man and who insisted that man is simply a part of nature, one of the members of nature, nevertheless set up a state of alienation between man and nature without precedent. I am a part of nature. I am something that nature fluked into being, but nevertheless this fluke is something that nature doesn't care about. It doesn't care about my ego. Its future. All that is important to nature is the species. The individual is irrelevant. At the same time, this philosophy arose when we were becoming conscious of the sheer magnitude of the universe. And it took the first impression of this vastness as a pretext for making little of human beings and saying, what do you matter in this huge cosmos? You're just a little fluke. You're just a little nothing at all. This thing goes way on beyond all imagination. And therefore man is just so much fungus on a rock, and a very tiny rock at that. In other words, it took the standpoint, let's set up a scale between two limits. And this is the traditional Western opposition. On the one end of the scale to the left here, you have matter, the inert, the clay put into shape by the potter. On the other end of the scale you have spirit, which is intelligence. And these are what the mathematicians call limits. And a limit is something you approach, but you never actually get there. Now, what the 19th century mythology did was to think of all things towards the limit called matter. It said, in effect, there is this dead material stuff. It is energetic, but the energy is unintelligent. It's a kind of roaring mechanical energy like fire or electricity or so on, it is not intelligent. Now, do you see the intent behind this mythology? The intent is to deprecate. The intent is, as we say now, to put down the human being, because the human being felt that hitherto he had been put up too far in the wrong way. You are a child of God, and the Lord loves you very dearly, but, you know, that's just insufferable. You have an immortal soul. Your life is endless, but it can very well turn out to be a life of endless agony when you fry in hell. And that was a very serious threat to both Protestants and Catholics. And so it's much better, much more comfortable to have a dead universe than a living universe so everlastingly threatening. So then, the mythology of the 19th century, under which most of us still operate, because we operate under it because it has become so plausible. The science out of which this mythology arose has been so effective. It has produced such a marvelous splash of technological marvels that its point of view, or the point of view of those scientists who started the whole thing going, has become amazingly persuasive and convincing. After all, if I can reach into your brain with a very, very subtle instrument, and I can poke about inside and press there, and suddenly, on a certain point when I press it, a world of memory comes to life so vividly that you see it before your very eyes. I remove the instrument, it vanishes. I touch another place. You experience intense pleasure, absolutely unbelievable pleasure. I remove it, the sensation vanishes. Every time I touch inside, you get a sensation externally of intense reality. And I say, after all, I was only just pushing things in your brain. You see what a push-button thing you are? That's it. I can just poke around and you can see anything. But all that's happening is I'm putting a little electrode or something on certain parts of your brain. That's all you are, poor fish. You're just that kind of a sensitive sponge inside your head bone. Well, that gets very persuasive, you see. And people are therefore in a position, they are prejudiced to favor a mythology that will make out that you are, after all, nothing but something or other. Nothing but a kind of complicated neurological jello. And that point of view, as I said, has become enormously convincing. It's plausible today, whereas the old point of view of God the Father and all the angels isn't plausible. It seems kind of weird in relation to what we know about the state of the universe. Now, what we have to see is that both of these points of view are equally mythological. And there's no more reason to take one than the other. what these points of view reflect are nothing other than certain attitudes to living. Now you see, if you want to live in a way that always is saying, I think that life is disgusting. Supposing you want to deny being, then you can always describe it in ways that are offensive. You can always say playing the violin is just scraping cat's entrails with horsehair. That puts it down, and you say, people who play golf, they're a bunch of idiots who go out on take a walk, and they hit a stupid little ball with sticks. Or that people who like music are just a bunch of idiots who sit around and go out of their minds listening to a lot of complicated noises. See, there's always a way of talking about something to make it sound terrible. Equally, there's the way of talking about something to make it sound great. Now, what do you want to do? Do you want to live your life in such a way that you're always saying to it, do you want to, is that a good way to conduct things? Or do you want to live your life in such a way that you say, come on, let's go. You see, let's swing this thing.
Now this is to me the primary thing that Jung saw, that in order to admit and really accept and understand the evil in oneself, one had to be able to do it without being an enemy to it. As he put it, you had to accept your own dark side. In other words, he understood that an integrated person is not a person who simply eliminated the sense of guilt or the sense of anxiety from his life, who is fearless and wooden and kind of sage of stone. He's a person who feels all these things, but has no recrimination against himself for feeling them. Recognition of the fact that behind the social role that you assume, behind all your pretensions to being either a good citizen or a fine scholar or a great scientist or a leading politician or physician or whatever you happen to be, but behind this facade there is a certain element of the unreconstructed bum, not as something to be condemned and wailed over, but as something to be recognized as contributive to one's greatness and to one's positive aspects in the same way that manure is contributive to the perfume of the rose. Jung saw this and Jung accepted this. And I want to read a passage from one of his lectures, which I think is one of the greatest things he ever wrote, and which has been a very marvelous thing for me. It was in a lecture delivered to a group of clergy in Switzerland a considerable number of years ago, and he writes as follows. People forget that even doctors have moral scruples. and that certain patients' confessions are hard even for a doctor to swallow. Yet the patient does not feel himself accepted unless the very worst in him is accepted too. No one can bring this about by mere words. It comes only through reflection and through the doctor's attitude towards himself and his own dark side. If the doctor wants to guide another, or even accompany him a step of the way, he must feel with that person's psyche. He never feels it when he passes judgment. Whether he puts his judgments into words or keeps them to himself makes not the slightest difference. To take the opposite position and to agree with the patient offhand is also of no use. Feeling comes only through unprejudiced objectivity. This sounds almost like a scientific precept, and it could be confused with a purely intellectual, abstract attitude of mind. But what I mean is something quite different. It is a human quality, a kind of deep respect for the facts, for the man who suffers from them, and for the riddle of such a man's life. The truly religious person has this attitude. He knows that God has brought all sorts of strange and inconceivable things to pass, and seeks in the most curious ways to enter a man's heart. He therefore senses in everything the unseen presence of the divine will. This is what I mean by unprejudiced objectivity. It is a moral achievement on the part of the doctor, who ought not to let himself be repelled by sickness and corruption. We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. I am the oppressor of the person I condemn, not his friend and fellow sufferer. I do not in the least mean to say that we must never pass judgment when we desire to help and improve. But if the doctor wishes to help a human being, he must be able to accept him as he is. In reality, only when he has already seen and accepted himself as he is. Perhaps this sounds very simple, but simple things are always the most difficult. In actual life, it requires the greatest art to be simple, and so acceptance of oneself is the essence of the moral problem and the acid test of one's whole outlook on life. That I feed the beggar, that I forgive an insult, that I love my enemy in the name of Christ, all these are undoubtedly great virtues. What I do unto the least of my brethren, that I do unto Christ. But what if I should discover that the least amongst them all, the poorest of all beggars, the most impudent of all offenders, yea, the very fiend himself, that these are within me, and that I myself stand in need of the alms of my own kindness? That I myself am the enemy who must be loved, what then? Then, as a rule, the whole truth of Christianity is reversed. There is then no more talk of love and long-suffering. We say to the brother within us, Raka, and condemn and rage against ourselves. We hide him from the world. We deny ever having met this least among the lowly in ourselves, and had it been God himself who drew near to us in this despicable form, we should have denied him 1,000 times before a single cock had crowed. Well, you may think the metaphors rather strong, but I feel that they are not so needlessly. This is a very, very forceful passage, and a memorable one in all Jung's works, trying to heal this insanity from which our culture in particular has suffered, of thinking that a human being can become hale, healthy and holy by being divided against himself in inner conflict, paralleling the conception of a cosmic conflict between an absolute good and an absolute evil, which cannot be reduced to any prior and underlying unity. In other words, our rage, and our very proper rage, against evil things which occur in this world, must not overstep itself. For if we require as a justification for our rage a fundamental and metaphysical division between good and evil, we have an insane and, in a certain sense, schizophrenic universe, of which no sense whatsoever can be made. All conflict, Jung was saying, all opposition has its resolution in an underlying unity. You cannot understand the meaning of to be unless you understand the meaning of not to be. You cannot understand the meaning of good unless you understand the meaning of evil. Even St. Thomas Aquinas saw this, for he said that just as it is the silent pause which gives sweetness to the chant, so it is suffering, and so it is evil, which makes possible the recognition of virtue. This is not, as Jung tries to explain, a philosophy of condoning the evil. To take the opposite position, he said, and to agree with the patient offhand is also of no use, but estranges him, the doctor, or estranges him, the patient, as much as condemnation. Let me continue further, reading from this extraordinary passage. Healing may be called, Jung says, a religious problem. In the sphere of social or national relations, the state of suffering may be civil war, and this state is to be cured by the Christian virtue of forgiveness and love of one's enemies. That which we recommend with the conviction of good Christians as applicable to external situations, we must also apply inwardly in the treatment of neurosis. This is why modern man has heard enough about guilt and sin. He is sorely beset by his own bad conscience, and wants rather to know how he is to reconcile himself with his own nature, how he is to love the enemy in his own heart, and call the wolf his brother. The modern man does not want to know in what way he can imitate Christ, but in what way he can live his own individual life, however meager and uninteresting it may be. It is because every form of imitation seems to him deadening and sterile that he rebels against the force of tradition that would hold him to well-trodden ways. All such roads for him lead in the wrong direction. He may not know it, but he behaves as if his own individual life were God's special will which must be fulfilled at all costs. This is the source of his egoism, which is one of the most tangible evils of the neurotic state. But the person who tells him he is too egoistic has already lost his confidence, and rightly so, for that person has driven him still further into his neurosis. If I wish to effect a cure for my patients, I am forced to acknowledge the deep significance of their egoism. I should be blind indeed if I did not recognize it as a true will of God. I must even help the patient to prevail in his egoism. If he succeeds in this, he estranges himself from other people. He drives them away, and they come to themselves as they should, for they were seeking to rob him of his sacred egoism. This must be left to him, for it is his strongest and healthiest power. It is, as I have said, a true will of God, which sometimes drives him into complete isolation. However wretched this state may be, it also stands him in good stead, for in this way alone can he get to know himself and learn what an invaluable treasure is the love of his fellow beings. It is, moreover, only in the state of complete abandonment and loneliness that we experience the helpful powers of our own natures. End of quote. This is a very striking example of Jung's power to comprehend and integrate points of view as well as psychological attitudes that seem on the surface to be completely antithetical. For example, even in his own work, when he was devoting himself to the study of Eastern philosophy, he had some difficulty in comprehending the, let's say, the Buddhistic denial of the reality of the ego. But you can see that in practice, in what he was actually trying to get at, he was moving towards the same position that is intended in both the Hindu and the Buddhist philosophy about the nature of the ego. Just for example, as the Hindu will say, that the I principle in man is not really a separate ego, but an expression of the universal life of Brahman, or the Godhead. So Jung is saying here that the development of the ego in man is a true will of God, and that it is only by following the ego that one, and developing it to its full extent, that one fulfills the function which this, you might say, temporary illusion has in man's psychic life. For he goes on and says here, when one has several times seen this development at work, one can no longer deny that what was evil has turned to good, and that what seemed good has kept alive the forces of evil. The archdemon of egoism leads us along the royal road to that ingathering which religious experience demands. What we observe here is a fundamental law of life, enantiodromia, or conversion into the opposite. And it is this that makes possible the reunion of the warring halves of the personality, and thereby brings the civil war to an end. End of quote. In other words, he was seeing that, as Blake said, a fool who persists in his folly will become wise. That the development of egoism in man is not something to be overcome or better integrated by opposition to it, but by following it. It's almost, isn't it, the principle of judo, not overcoming what appears to be a hostile force by opposing it, but by swinging with the punch or rolling with the punch. And so by following the ego transcends itself. And in this moment of insight, the great Westerner, who comes out of a whole tradition of human personality which centers it upon the ego, upon individual separateness, by going along consistently with this principle, comes to the same position as the Easterner. That is to say, to the point of view where one sees conflict, which at first sight had seemed absolute, as resting upon a primordial unity, thereby attaining a profound, unshakable peace of the heart, which can nevertheless contain conflict, not a peace that is simply static and lifeless, but a peace that passes understanding.
Change, and everything is changed, nothing can be held on to. To the degree that you go with a stream, you see, you are still. You're flowing with it. But to the degree you resist the stream, then you notice that the current is rushing past you and fighting with you. So swim with it. Go with it. And you're there. You're at rest. And this is, of course, particularly true when it comes to those moments when life really seems to be going to take us away. And the stream of change is going to swallow us completely. The moment of death. And we think, oh, this is it. This is the end. And so at death we withdraw. Say, no, not that. Not yet, please. But actually, the whole problem is that there really is no other problem for human beings than to go over that waterfall when it comes. Just as you go over any other waterfall. Just as you go on from day to day. Just as you go to sleep at night. Be absolutely willing to die. I'm not preaching. I'm not saying you ought to be willing to die and that you should muscle up your courage and somehow put on a good front when the terrible thing comes. That's not the idea at all. The point is that you can only die well if you understand this system of waves. If you understand that your disappearance as the form in which you think you are you, your disappearance as this particular organism, is simply seasonal, that you are just as much the dark space beyond death as you are the light interval called life. These are just two sides of you, because you is the total wave. See, you can't have half a wave. Nobody ever saw waves which just had crests, no troughs. So you can't have half a human being who is born but doesn't die. Half a thing. That would be only half a thing. But the propagation of vibrations, and life is vibration, it simply goes on and on, but its cycles are long cycles and short cycles. Space, you see, is not just nothing. So then you see, here's the principle. When you don't resist change, I mean over-resist. I don't mean being flabby. When you don't resist change, you see that the changing world, nirvana, as I said, means breathe out. Let go of the breath. So in the same way, don't resist change. It's all the same principle. So the Bodhisattva saves all beings, not by preaching sermons to them, but by showing them that they are delivered, they are liberated by the very fact of not being able to stop changing. See what happens. You go to a hospital and you're at the end. You've got terminal cancer. And all your friends come around and they wear false smiles and they say, cheer up, you'll be all right. In a few days from now, you'll be back home and we'll go out for a picnic again. The doctors have their bedside man. You see, a doctor is absolutely helpless with a terminal case because a doctor is, by social definition, a healer. And he's not allowed to help you die. He's out of role. Even though, I mean, he may sneak behind the rules and do it, but he's definitely, he's got to heal you. So he's going to keep you indefinitely on the end of tubes and all kinds of things. While there's a certain grave demeanor to all this, and all the nurses are so pleasant and so totally distant because they know this is death. And they mayn't be frank with you. That's why they feel distant. It's not that they're not concerned. It's not that they're heartless people, but that they just don't know how to be frank, like lots of people when they meet a drunk. They don't know what to do with a drunk. So, I mean, a little change in social attitude about this will fortify everybody else. I mean, if I'm alone and all my relatives are going, kind of pretending to me, it's going to be hard for me. I've got to challenge the whole bunch of them and get my dander up and say, listen, damn you, I don't want all this thing around here. You've got to take a different attitude about my death. Well, that's hard. But if everybody helps me, and we do, we're all one body, if they all come around and say, congratulations, you're going to die. I know very well a skillful priest handling a person dying can do this for them. But he has to talk very, very, very straight. And he has to say, listen, these doctors, don't you pay any attention to them. They're trying to amuse you and deceive you. You're going to die. This isn't terrible. But it's just going to be the end of you as a system of memories. And so you've got a great chance right now, before it happens, to let go of everything. Because you know it's going to go, and it is going to help you. It's going to help you let go of everything. So if you have any possessions left, give them away. Give everything away. And if you have anything to say that is you felt that you ought to say before you die, and that you're kind of hanging on to and it's bothering you, say it. I mean, I don't mean necessarily a last confession, but say it said that Adlai Stevenson, shortly before he died, said that he had been making a monkey of himself because he didn't agree with the government's policy about something or other. You know, he had to get that off his chest because he had a little thought in the back of his mind that things were catching up with him. You see? So the moment comes when this thing called death has to be taken completely.
not as some ghastly accident, something that all your friends are going to stay away because you're awful. I mean, sometimes people, when they die, are in a very unpleasant physical condition. They don't smell good, they don't look good, and so on. But an enormous amount can be done with scientific methods to make things reasonably tidy from a purely sensory point of view. But the main thing is the attitude, that death is as positive as birth and should be a matter for rejoicing, because death is the symbol of the liberation. There is a wonderful saying that Ananda Kumaraswamy used to quote. I pray that death will not come and find me still unannihilate. In other words, that man dies happy if there is no one to die. In other words, if the ego has disappeared before death caught up with it. But you see, the knowledge of death helps the ego to disappear, because it tells you you can't hang on. So what we need, if we're going to have a good religion around, that's one of the places where it can start.
throughout Asia and Europe, Americans have the undeserved reputation of being authors of the most materialistic civilization that ever existed. The undeserved reputation. Because never was there a culture so completely unmaterialistic. I define a materialist as a person who loves material and who reverences it and who delights in using it to its best advantage. And if you will examine the system of education through which most of our children are compelled to pass, you will discover that it imparts almost no knowledge whatsoever of any kind of material competence. Our education is exclusively bookish and is designed on the whole to train people to be bureaucrats, bankers' clerks, insurance salesmen, teachers, and we hope intellectuals. It is a curious thing, but in its weak moments, it admits that there are a lot of people going through the scheme who really will never qualify for graduate school, not even perhaps for college. And for these it must provide, rather regretfully, some courses which train them for other things. It's always a joke among Europeans that in American colleges you can get an AB, you can get credits towards an AB for courses in basket weaving. And this isn't really so funny as it looks. Because when it is the ideal that sort of everyone should go through college, if possible, you have to adjust to facts. You can't have a nation, you can't have a society in which everyone is always occupied in intellectual and computational pursuits. A few people have to be around who know how to handle the material world in a gracious way. And for these people we provide only regretfully, as an afterthought, that people who might otherwise be dropouts in high school should be given some courses which would prepare them for trades in carpentry, metallurgy, even perhaps auto mechanics, furniture makers, cooks, and so on. But as a rule, because these kinds of education in the academic world are provided only with regret. They are provided in a slovenly fashion. We simply do not relate to the material world. We are increasingly lacking in any kind of competence in handling physical matter, except in such far-out cases as people who make jet aircraft and certain very sophisticated types of scientific instruments, where it is absolutely necessary that there be the highest degree of mastery. Aside from that, because of the lack of material competence, our life is extremely drab. It is simply astonishing that the wealthiest nation on earth simply does not know how to enjoy itself in a material and obvious way.